Although the title of my presentation suggests otherwise, the topic of my talk is not so much to be conspiracy theories, but rather the interdisciplinary research on conspiracy theories. For this reason, as a first step, I would like to propose a way to structure the interdisciplinary debate on conspiracy theories. A first difference, a basic distinction, can be made between normative and descriptive positions. Descriptive positions remain neutral with respect to whether or which conspiracy theories should be rejected or endorsed. Normative positions attempt to answer the question what normative or evaluative attitude should we take toward conspiracy theories. In general, it's often quite difficult to tell whether a position is descriptive or normative, but as an ideal classification we can stick to this distinction. So what I want to do is go through some positions within this classification and criticize them for ignoring some basic insights from philosophy of science. My main contention will be that some of the most influential of these positions are unconvincing simply because they ignore these insights. So my goal in this talk is not so much to present new works or findings in the area of philosophy of science. Rather, I want to use some basic teachings from philosophy of science in order to reject some positions found in the interdisciplinary debate on conspiracy theories. And in the final section, I will outline my own position on the topic. Before I examine a first position, I have to solve an important and, I think, underestimated problem. The problem is this. There are a large number of extensionally incompatible but equally intuitive definitions of the term conspiracy theories in the debate and no criterion that would help decide between the competing definitions. And I have to deal with this problem since the positions I will criticize also use different definitions. In order to deal with this problem, I would like to propose a definition that is as unifying as possible and as close as possible to ordinary usage. We can call this definition a minimal definition. As far as I can see, the proponents of the positions I will examine can agree with this definition. The definition goes as follows. T is a conspiracy theory about event E if and only if T is a theory that explains E. Caution, this does not mean that the explanation T implies is a true or good explanation. It only means that T tries to explain E. B. In order to explain E, T postulates that at least two persons plan and or perform one or more acts in secret, and the act or the acts are planned and or performed to the disadvantage of third parties. The last two conditions, of course, define the concept of a conspiracy. The classical conceptions of conspiracies have the problem that they also include surprise parties, which is quite counterintuitive. So I think it is more in line with our intuitions to exclude surprise parties. And I think this definition does that. With this definition at hand, I can now move on to the justification of my main contention. For this purpose, I will examine one descriptive position and three normative. Let's start with the descriptive camp. Of course, there are a large number of different questions that the positions in this camp try to answer, but one of the most prominent questions is certainly this. Why do people believe in conspiracy theories? Here we can find a lot of different but often very similar answers. Here I would like to discuss the answers given by the German psychologist Sebastian Bartoschek in his comprehensive study Bekanntheit von und Zustimmung zu Verschwörungstheorien from 2015. Unfortunately, this study was published only in German. What makes the study particularly interesting for my presentation is the fact that Bartoschek explicitly claims that he remains value neutral, wertneutral. He says, for example, a fundamentally negative assessment of belief in conspiracy theories seems to make little sense since it is part of a solidly anchored human system and can serve positive purposes. And what might those purposes be, according to Bartoschek? Based on previous psychological studies, he identifies especially two functions of conspiracy theories. The first is the structure-forming function, and the second is the sense-making function. According to my reading, Bartoszek describes the first function in the following way. People who believe in conspiracy theories look for patterns that are not seen by others. This was empirically investigated in a famous study by Whitson and Galinsky. The belief in conspiracy theories helps to reduce complexity and formulate simple cause and effect models, and this in turn can help reduce their own insecurities. In this sense, this function can also be called security creating function. Some conspiracy theories, though, don't realize this structure-forming function. Bartoszek cites theories that claim that celebrities who were presumed dead, such as Elvis Presley, Lady Diana or Kurt Cobain, faked their deaths or did not die because of drug abuse, car accident or suicide as claimed in the official versions. These theories, Bartoszek claims, help to integrate the alleged death of a celebrity meaningfully into his or her previous life course. So, we can sum up. In Bartoszek's view, conspiracy theories can be both reasonable and unreasonable. This follows from his neutral attitude, and the question of why people believe in conspiracy theories can be answered by means of psychological research. I will now show that this position is not convincing because it ignores some insights from philosophy of science. The problem I want to point out is that Bartoszek's answers seem to be based on a version of the symmetry thesis. By symmetry thesis, I mean the idea that the formation of both rational and irrational beliefs can be explained in the same way and completely by the social sciences. Of course, I'm alluding here to the strong program in the sociology of knowledge formulated most notably by David Bloor. I will not delve into the details of these theses. The point I wish to make is that philosophers of science pointed out the drawbacks of this idea as early as the 1980s, shortly after Bloor's work was published. For example, Larry Lawden. Lawden formulates various objections against the symmetry thesis. I confine myself here to what I see as his main argument. This argument begins with the following characterization of the symmetry thesis. What the symmetry thesis is really asserting is the causal or explanatory irrelevance of one's knowledge of the truth, rationality, or success of a belief. In other words, for Bloor, Lawden argues, it is irrelevant whether the epistemic subject has good reasons for her belief. But regarding rationality, if we can show that there is even one sense of rationality which is causally relevant to the explanation of beliefs, then we will have shown that the thesis of rational symmetry is ill-conceived. As I understand Lawden, he finds this sense of rationality in what he calls a sociological model of good reasons. This model is part of the common sense framework of reasons and implies a causal theory of rationality. According to this theory, a belief is rational or reasonable provided the agent can give reasons for it and can show that those reasons were antecedent to the adoption of the belief. The decisive point is that this theory contradicts the symmetry thesis since it insists that there are specific mechanisms for the generation of rational beliefs which are not involved in the generation of unreasonable beliefs. Moreover, Lawden believes that the common sense framework and, with it, the causal theory of rationality are the only means presently available to us, since sociologists have not yet presented a sufficiently good alternative model. Regarding the symmetry thesis about rationality, Lawden's conclusion is this. By asserting that rational and irrational beliefs are to be explained indifferently, the symmetry thesis is apparently committed to the view that reasoning processes have no causal efficacy in the production of any beliefs. Such a claim is far too strong to be taken seriously. I want to develop this last remark a little further. Although Lawden does not mention this in his text, I think his conclusion can be interpreted as accusing Bloor's strong program of ignoring the difference between the context of discovery and the context of justification. And this is the point at which I want to apply Lawden's critique to Bartoszek's descriptivist position. It is striking that in answering the question of why people believe in conspiracy theories, Bartoszek does not mention the possibility that people believe in these theories because they think that they have good reasons for this belief. Thus, if Bartoszek adopts a neutral attitude and thinks that the psychological explanation of beliefs in conspiracy theories is sufficient, then he seems to espouse the symmetry thesis, which leads him to ignore or confuse the difference between the two contexts. So with Laudon, we can say it may well be that the desire for security leads to the emergence of belief in conspiracy theories, but as an answer to the descriptive question, this claim is incomplete at best. I do not consider this critique to be irrefutable and Laudon's argument to be beyond doubt. And of course, I'm not saying that psychological studies like Bartoszek's are completely misguided, but I do think that such studies would gain quality if they took philosophical insights and concepts into account. I will outline how this might work in the final part of my talk. I now come to the normative positions. Before discussing them, I would like to refine my proposal for structuring the debate. In my view, we can find three competing families of theories in the normative camp. The most famous of these is a position that I call general repressivism. Let me say that I'm not very happy with the word repressivism. I just took it from Kuhn, Oliver Kuhn, the sociologist, not Thomas Kuhn. So, general repressivists assert that there is a set of normative properties or features common to all conspiracy theories and that these properties justify a rejection of all conspiracy theories. A second normative position I call partial repressivism. In contrast to general repressivism, this kind of repressivism denies that all conspiracy theories share problematic features. Rather, according to this position, there is a subset within the set of conspiracy theories, and only the theories in this subset are problematic. Partial repressivists therefore attempt to identify or delineate this subset by drawing on various criteria. Finally, there is a third position, which I refer to as permissivism. Here too, I'm not happy with the name, also because there is an epistemological position with the same name, but it has nothing to do with conspiracy theories. Permissivists deny both the claim that there are normative properties common to all conspiracy theories and the possibility of identifying a subset of problematic conspiracy theories. Permissivists then often argue that we should treat conspiracy theories in the same way we treat all the other theories, among which there are reasonable and unreasonable theories. Here's an overview, including some influential and recent works on the topic. I mentioned here works from the international debate as well as from the German debate. The German debate is a bit special because, in my view, general repressivism is more dominant here than in other countries. Of course, it is not always clear in which group an author or a work falls. Nevertheless, we can almost always identify clear tendencies. I will now examine three positions, one from each of these three groups. Interestingly, all of these three positions use the same class of arguments, which I call demarcation arguments. These arguments are motivated by the attempt to demarcate A from B. In the case of general repressivism, this means, first and foremost, that conspiracy theories should be marked off from science. This is done by the general repressivists in various ways. By far the most prominent way to do this is to distinguish conspiracy theories from science by resorting to a naive form of falsificationism. I will call this way the falsification argument. I think the following quotes from German as well as from the international literature speak for themselves. These two quotes, and especially the second, are of particular interest because they expose a tendency that is unique in Germany. Both in the German language research literature and in the German media coverage, the term conspiracy theory has become unpopular because theory is associated only with scientific theories and because the prevailing view here is that conspiracy theories are the opposite of scientific theories. Of course, this tendency does not correspond to philosophical usage, since in philosophy the term theory usually refers to answers to why questions in van Fraasen's sense. And I see no need to reserve this term only for scientific theories. But this is not my main objection. What I would like to point out is the fact that none of the cited works says a word about the debate of the last 80 years within philosophy of science about falsificationism, and therefore ignores the insurmountable problems that have refuted naive falsificationism. Most of the texts I cite don't even mention Popper. So my main objection to these arguments from general repressivism is that these positions ignore research within the philosophy of science, and precisely because of this ignorance suffer from false picture of conspiracy theories and scientific theories. But there are some exceptions within the general repressivist family. Michael Butter, for instance, a member of this family, writes, "Above all, however, the argument that conspiracy theories differ from scientific ones in that they are not falsifiable is invalid. Conspiracy theories can of course be disproved, indeed it happens all the time. And further, the trouble is that the vast majority of die-hard conspiracy theorists refuse to accept even conclusive counter-evidence." While I appreciate Butter's critique of the falsification argument, I have to say that this remark nevertheless makes Butter a proponent of this argument, at least if falsification is meant in Popper's sense. For Popper distinguishes between theories that are in principle not falsifiable and those whose proponents refuse to accept the falsification. Here too, this shows an ignorance of basic concepts in the philosophy of science. Butter continues by formulating an interpretation of Thomas Kuhn's position. Inconsistent though it may be with the scientific ideal, in practice even serious academics sometimes have great difficulty in accepting the refutation of their ideas. They too can be positively irrational, clinging to their views even when they fly in the face of the facts. This phenomenon was demonstrated by Thomas S. Kuhn in the 1960s with reference to the great paradigm shifts in the history of Western science, but it also applies at a lower level to scientific theories in a narrower sense. Again, I appreciate Butter's consideration of Kuhn's work, but I don't think Kuhn has claimed that scientists act irrationally. More importantly, Kuhn himself has rejected this way of interpreting his position. I would now like to address a demarcation argument made by a proponent of partial repressivism. As I said earlier, this kind of repressivism aims to distinguish reasonable from unreasonable conspiracy theories. In 1999, an essay was published that gave a new direction to the philosophical debate on conspiracy theories. I refer to the essay Of Conspiracy Theories by Brian Keeley. In this essay, Keeley conjectures conspiracy theories are the only theories for which evidence against them is actually construed as evidence in favor of them. This sounds like a version of the falsification argument asserted by most adherents of general repressivism. But Keeley has more to say about this way of unfalsifiability of conspiracy theories. The worry is that, given a situation where all potentially falsifying evidence can be construed as supporting or at worst neutral evidence, then conspiracy theories are by definition unfalsifiable. In favor of conspiracy theorists, it should be noted that this unfalsifiability is not as ad hoc as it might initially seem, due to the active nature of the investigated. It is not ad hoc to suppose that false and misleading data will be thrown your way when one supposes that there is somebody out there actively throwing that data at you. And this is the reason why Keeley claims unfalsifiability is only a reasonable criterion in cases where we do not have a reason to believe that there are powerful agents seeking to steer our investigation away from the truth of the matter. So, according to Keeley, the falsification criterion does not lend itself to a rejection of conspiracy theories, as the general repressivists believe. Instead, Keeley thinks that reinterpreting evidence against a conspiracy theory as evidence in favor of it can generate an unreasonable, or as he puts it, unwarranted conspiracy theory. This tactic, if used too often, leads to a pervasive skepticism about our public, fact-gathering institutions and the individuals working within them. We can skip over the details of this account. The crucial point is that Keeley uses the same naive notion of falsification as the general repressivists when he says, falsifiability is a perfectly fine criterion in the case of natural science when the target of investigation is neutral with respect to our queries. And just as with the general repressivists, there is no reference in Keeley's text to the debate on falsificationism in the philosophy of science. Let's look at a final example of a normative position within the debate on conspiracy theories. This last position was developed by David Cody and focuses not on the distinction between conspiracy theories and science or between reasonable and unreasonable conspiracy theories, but on the difference between reasonable and unreasonable theories about conspiracy theories. This position is a permissivist position and is therefore opposed to both general and partial repressivism. In his 2019 paper, Psychology and Conspiracy Theories, Cody, according to my interpretation, attacks psychological research on conspiracy theories for the repressivist stance on which this research is based. Cody has a ready tongue. He denounces psychological research for several reasons. However, I think his main charge is expressed in the following passage. If the persecution of those labeled as conspiracy theorists in our culture is analogous to the medieval persecution of those labeled as heretics, then the role of psychologists in our culture is analogous to that of the Inquisition. And at the end of his essay he says, I hope and believe that in the future we will look back on the pseudoscientific study of conspiracy theories by many professional psychologists with the same bemused wonder that we now look back on phrenology. So in contrast to repressivism, we find no reference to falsification here. But still, when Cody says that many psychologists work pseudoscientifically, he seems to be committing himself to a demarcation criterion that mark off scientific psychology from pseudoscientific one. And as before, we find no reference to the debate on the demarcation problem. I don't want to demand that one must always refer to philosophy of science when talking about pseudoscience, but in my view, such a philosophical critique of a well-established scientific discipline should take into account the fact that the debate about the demarcation problem is still open, as Sven Ove Hansen shows in his terrific Stanford Encyclopedia article. Let me say that I think Cody's attack is over the top in the choice of words, and I don't think it is productive to label parts of well-established subjects as pseudoscientific. Nonetheless, I agree with some of Cody's observations about psychological research on conspiracy theories, and, what is more important and what leads me to the last part of my presentation, I share his permissivist attitude. In this final part, therefore, I would like to outline a new research program that abandons the search for a demarcation criterion between A and B, as well as the trench warfare between academic disciplines, emphasizing instead the need for interdisciplinary research on conspiracy theories. What might such a program look like? First of all, we can formulate the hard core of the new program. It goes as follows. The credibility of a theory T is independent of whether T is a conspiracy theory. Moreover, such a program needs a neutral definition of the term conspiracy theory, that is, a definition that does not stipulate that conspiracy theories are false or irrational. The definition I introduced in the first part of my talk seems to be the best candidate for this. More important than the definition of conspiracy theory in the new program is its interdisciplinary character. As I said, it is designed to be very interdisciplinary, but within we have a very strict division of labor. The idea is this. Philosophy formulates formal conditions of acceptability. That is, philosophy formulates an epistemology of acceptability and defines key concepts. And the empirical social sciences test whether these conditions are met. Let me illustrate this idea very briefly. Let us first consider the philosophical side. We can begin by starting quite abstractly from a disagreement between conspiracy theories and official or scientific theories. And now the hard philosophical work begins. We need to clarify what it means to have a genuine disagreement. What is the proper definition of genuine disagreement? What are important differences between the various types of genuine disagreements, and so on? We also need to clarify what it means that there is evidence in favor of one side or the other. That does not mean that we have to examine whether there is evidence. This is an empirical question. No, we have to clarify what it means that there is evidence. Then we must take into account that not all evidence is available to all epistemic subjects. For example, there might be evidence that is only available to experts. Therefore, we need higher order evidence, that is, evidence that supports the belief that there is first order evidence. Philosophers have described some kinds of such higher order evidence. So this picture illustrates the idea of formal conditions of acceptability. Now let us consider the empirical side of the new program. To this end, I would like to present two cases from Germany in which theories treated as conspiracy theories play a decisive role. The first case I call Reichsbürger. Although Germany has been considered a sovereign state at least since the signing of the 2+4 treaties in 1990, there are various groups of individuals who doubt Germany's sovereignty. For example, the so-called Reichsbürger see themselves as citizens of the German Reich. According to most political scientists, this group is characterized by the conspiracy theory that the German people are being deceived by foreign powers. Among other things, this group argues that there was no peace treaty after World War II, that the constitution Grundgesetz is not a real constitution, and that Germany is actually a corporation. Political science and legal history contradict these arguments. According to our neutral definition, we have to say that only the Reichsbürger theory is a conspiracy theory. Let's look at a second case, which I named NSU complex. The German term NSU complex refers to the crimes committed by the right-wing terrorist group National Socialist Underground NSU, the background of these crimes, and the course of investigations into them. The crimes included the murder of 9 people perceived by the NSU as foreigners and a police officer. Although a court has found that the NSU consisted only of Uwe Böhnhardt, Beate Zschäpe and Uwe Mundlos, who allegedly planned and executed the crimes, this is the alone theory, lawyers for the survivors and journalists, among others, doubt this finding. They rely on evidence suggesting that the NSU was intentionally and or unintentionally supported by state agencies, insofar as state officials destroyed records believed to contain data about the NSU. This is the help theory. Such conjectures are treated as conspiracy theories in the media. According to our definition, and in contrast to the first case, we must treat both the help theory and alone theory as conspiracy theories here. Okay, let's apply the idea of the new program to the first example. According to the formal requirements of this idea, we must start from the observation that the Reichsbürger theory contradicts the official theory. I think it's pretty clear that we need second-order evidence here, since most of us are not experts in legal history. And if we investigate these second-order evidence empirically, I believe that we will get this picture. A survey conducted by the German Federal Criminal Police Office in cooperation with the German Domestic Intelligence Service in late 2020 found that about 20,000 people held the Reichsbürger theory, but the total population in Germany at that time was about 85 million. So we know that more people adhere to the official story, but we also know that more experts adhere to the official story, provided of course that the term expert is clearly defined. The other points are more controversial, but I think the assumption is plausible that the belief in the official story is more convincing. Finally, let us consider the application to the second example. Again, we have to start from the observation that there is a disagreement between the alone theory and the official help theory. Again, we need higher order evidence. And now we see that the empirical situation is much less clear than in the first case, because there are no surveys about how many people defend which theory. There are no studies about who the experts are and how many experts hold which theory. There is no empirical evidence on whether the experts work independently from each other, and so on. This unclear situation suggests, I want to claim, that we should suspend judgment as to which side is right in this dispute. And of course, this temporary result is completely different from rejecting the help theory or the alone theory simply because the definition mentioned above treats these theories as conspiracy theories. And this fits in very well with the hardcore of the new program. From my point of view, this is a very satisfactory result. Maybe not for you, which is good, because in this case we have something to discuss. Thank you very much.